He lived before he came to Dallas? Do you know?
Chicago, I think.
And do you know how long he's been in Dallas?
About 10 or 15 years, I think. Long time. Well regarded in Dallas. People think well of Jack Ruby.
Has he participated in civic things here in the city, or do you know?
Oh, I don't think so. He's a very generous man. I know he's helped a lot of people.
Do you know, sir, his political affiliation, if he has any political affiliation?
I don't think he really has any, as far as I know.
How did it, why was he so affected by the Kennedys? I mean, was he did he like Kennedy very much, or what was his particular...
Well, as I said before, Jack was a man that was very proud of all of our presidents. I think he would have been just as upset had it been former President Eisenhower or former President Truman or Hoover or anyone. I think if it had been any president, he would have been highly upset. I don't think political affiliations had anything to do with it. I don't even know whether he's a Democrat or Republican or whether he even knows whether
Did you ever hear him talk about politics or express his political philosophy?
I never have.
The concern of Dallas police, as we mentioned earlier, has resulted in the sending to Dallas of 20 highway patrolmen from nearby Tyler, Texas, 98 miles from the city. At the present time, the downtown area has been sealed off because of the massive traffic jam and the other difficulties caused by the events today. Earlier this afternoon, actually just a matter of minutes ago, Correspondent Lord talked with one man who had come to the City Hall to see Jack Ruby. He is a friend of Ruby's, and his name is C.A. Droby. He talked with Lord.
You are one of Ruby's lawyers. Perhaps you will defend him in this case. I understand that you received a call from your wife at home.
Yes, sir. The police detective told me. How he knew it, I don't know, that I had been threatened, and I just talked with my wife.
And what did you tell her?
Betty, and Betty told me she was crying and said that she had received 2 calls that I would be next to die.
From the same person?
Oh, she doesn't know. She said it.
With a foreign voice?
It's in a foreign voice, yes.
And what did you tell her?
I told her to get the baby and get out of the house. 9 years old.
Was it a man calling?
Yes.
A man calling both times?
Yes.
There is a report that Oswald has died. How do you feel about this now?
Well, I just don't know what to say. As a lawyer, and I've defended a lot of people, I think he should have had his day in court and let a jury decide his fate. I've always felt that way about anyone, regardless what he's charged with, that he ought to be tried before 12 folks of the community.
These past 2 days have not been good days for Dallas.
No, sir. Sure hasn't. I don't guess anyone's been as upset as I have about it. Of course, I was standing pretty close to the sheriff's office myself when the president was shot.
Did you see the actual shooting of the president?
No, sir, I didn't. Not my office is in the lawyer's building, which is just a short distance from where it actually happened.
Fine, thank you very much, sir.
As it later turned out, C.A. Droby, the man Bill Lord was talking to, has apparently not been selected to serve as one of the defense counsels for Jack Ruby. You heard him also mention threatening telephone calls to his wife from a foreign accented voice threatening him with death as being the next on the list. These rumors and threatening calls have been spreading throughout the city for the past several hours. There are many, many stories currently going around, some possibly linking Ruby to the latest dead man, Lee Oswald. None of these are confirmed. It is very difficult at this point to bring you up to date on so many totally erroneous reports. One of the attorneys who has been selected to serve as a defense counselor for 52-year-old Ruby is another visitor to the jail on the third floor, or rather at the City Hall. Bill Lord talked with him as well.
Howard, who has been selected to represent Jack Ruby. Mr. Howard, I understand you were up in the jail and talked to him. What did he say?
I just talked to him a few minutes ago with reference to whether or not he wanted my firm to represent him. He requested that we represent him along with Mr. Fred Bruner's firm. And,
what was his mood?
I would say that he was very excitable, almost in a state of shock. He's a very excitable, nervous man by nature, and he seemed to just be terribly disturbed.
Would you say he's so excitable by nature that he could do a thing like this?
I would say that he is one of the most excitable men that I know. I've talked to him about the president, and he was a great admirer of the president. He was also a great admirer of police officers, and at least on one occasion had prevented death or serious bodily injury to 2 officers. And that was written up in the paper several years ago, and he was commended for it.
Was he crying?
I would say he was almost in tears.
Did he say any words that you could repeat?
His voice was very shaky. Yes, we discussed the case to this extent that I advised him of his rights and what he should do and should not do, and he said he would follow my instructions to the best of his ability.
Are you worried about his safety?
Well, a man would have to be worried about his safety after the things that have happened here in the last 2 or 3 days. I don't feel that any law-abiding citizen should want to harm him in any way.
And yet
he might be.
Because Mr. Oswald was shot today.
He was shot when there was police all around him, and it didn't look like anyone could harm him, yet he was shot.
Lawyer Tom Howard, interviewed by ABC's Bill Lord. We understand that he has been selected as at least one of the defense counselors to serve for Jack Ruby, who has already been formally charged with first-degree murder in the death today of Lee Harvey Oswald. These events, these bizarre, frightening, strange, unbelievable events, have overshadowed somewhat another major story in Dallas, the story of the man who was riding directly in front of the president at the time of the assassination, Governor John Connally, who was wounded himself and for several hours was in very serious condition at that same Parkland Memorial Hospital. At the time of the Oswald slaying today, the Oswald shooting at the City Hall, approximately 11:15 a.m., the governor's wife, Mrs. John Connally, who has constantly been at her husband's bedside at Parkland Memorial Hospital, went before the press for the very first time. This is an extremely moving appearance, and it must be pointed out, I think, that besides the president, the First Lady, Mrs. Kennedy, the governor, Governor Connally, and the Secret Service man driving the car, there were no other individuals that close at the time of the assassination. And so Mrs. John Connally is perhaps the first real eyewitness that we have heard from directly. Here's Mrs. Connally.
Governor Connally has asked me to convey to the people of Texas, the nation, and the world our deep sorrow of the sickening tragedy which struck at one of President Kennedy's most triumphant hours. Words cannot fully express to Mrs. Kennedy and to the President's family our feelings, which we know all Texans share. Our son, John, will be our personal representative at the funeral of the President in Washington Monday. The governor joins me in asking that all Texans observe the day of mourning Monday in memory of the President. Speaking again for the governor and myself, I want to express our deepest appreciation for the wonderful friendship of so many fine people. We have received many telegrams, phone calls, and personal visits, for which we are very grateful. I especially appreciate the friendship and warmth of the people of Dallas, both before and after the terrible tragedy. We would also like to thank those who have sent so many beautiful flowers to the hospital. It is our hope that our friends who might wish to do this would instead contribute to the fund for the family of Officer Tippit. Our grief is all the greater because of his sacrifice. The governor is now apparently out of danger. I talked to him just now, and he asked me to tell everyone he's going to be all right. He's in good spirits, and we deeply appreciate the care he has received at Parkland Hospital from the doctors, the nurses, and the staff. John had a very, very close call. We thank God he was spared. I have one other thing to say, if I can. We had been with the President and Mrs. Kennedy through the tour. It had been such a wonderful tour. And when we arrived in Dallas and the long motorcade, the people couldn't have been friendlier. The crowds couldn't have been more wonderful, more generous in their reaction to the President. And I just had such a good feeling about the way they had received him in this city. I had just turned around and said to him, "You can't say Dallas doesn't love you, Mr. President." That was it.
There is certainly nothing that can be said after such a moving and emotional statement from the First Lady of Texas, Mrs. John Connally. As she stated, her husband's condition continues to show improvement. He remains at Parkland Memorial Hospital, currently under very strict and very heavy security guard. The strictness of the security in all areas of the Dallas community at the present time is extremely obvious, and I think it's extremely obvious why such security measurements are being taken. Very briefly to recap, 52-year-old Jack Rubenstein, who goes by the name of 52-year-old Jack Ruby, has been formally accused by the city of Dallas as being the slayer of Lee Harvey Oswald, the 24-year-old accused assassin of the President of the United States. Oswald died approximately an hour and a half after the fatal bullets were fired in the basement garage of the Dallas police station. At the present time, Ruby is being interrogated once again on the third floor of the Dallas City Hall. We understand that his sister, who has only recently recovered from surgery, has left her home to visit her brother. Mrs. Eva Grant is now at City Hall. We also understand that the city officials of Dallas, the city police officials, Police Chief Jess Curry, and federal agents are meeting at this hour at the chief's office and are awaiting the arrival from Washington of a key Justice Department official, apparently to piece together the strange facts and the multitude of rumors and suspicious stories that are circulating throughout this city tonight. This is Roger Sharp reporting from the studios of WFAA-TV in Dallas. Now back to Bob Young in New York.
The It is Sunday evening, November 24th, 1963. President Kennedy's body lies in state in the nation's capital. Lee Harvey Oswald's body is at a Fort Worth funeral home, and Jack Ruby sits in a solitary cell at Dallas Police Headquarters. On a day when the nation might have expected to begin overcoming the shock of losing its president, people are again numbed by the news that the accused assassin has also been gunned down.
We have received new dramatic scenes taken at Dallas City Hall that resulted in the death of Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of assassinating President John F. Kennedy. So if that is ready, we will take a look at these new sequences. This is the elevator bringing Oswald out to go to the armored car where he was to be transported to the county jail about 2 miles across town. Police Captain Will Fritz preceding. There's Oswald in the black sweater. Now Oswald coming out. You'll see the shooting occur very shortly. There comes the man from the right. Watch him. He walks up. He fires the gun. Oswald slumps to the floor. And then, of course, complete delirium and pandemonium breaks out. Cameramen and all getting pushed, shoved aside as the police immediately rushed to Jack Ruby, also rushed to Lee Oswald, trying to get aid for him and apprehending Jack Ruby, a man who owns a Dallas bar and who has just a while ago admitted to shooting Lee Harvey Oswald and resulting in his death. These scenes taken in the basement of Dallas City Hall, the Dallas Police Department, showing Jack Ruby approaching and firing point blank into Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of assassinating President John F. Kennedy here in Dallas Friday. Now the calm resulting after the shooting. Reporters trying to figure out exactly what did happen, trying to get some quotes, some comment from policemen. At that point, no one was sure exactly what had happened, but it was determined shortly afterward. There the news reporters gathered around. Getting ready to bring Ruby out. Now they're bringing the Lee Harvey Oswald out in an ambulance. Ambulance is coming in, actually, to now the body of Oswald being carried out and will be placed on the ambulance. There is Oswald on the stretcher, gravely wounded at this point. Died later at Parkland Hospital after open heart surgery failed. The ambulance in the basement of Dallas City Hall now moves out to take Oswald to Parkland Hospital, the very place where President John F. Kennedy died just 2 days ago. Roger Sharp.
Thank you, Bob. The facts in the story at the current time, attorney suspect Jack Ruby, the man who is the alleged slayer of Lee Oswald, has been formally charged with first-degree murder and is being held at this hour at City Hall.
5.5 hours ago, a shot echoed through these halls, and one of the men closest to the point where the shot was fired is this man. He is a detective, Detective L.C. Graves. Could you tell us what happened and what you were doing at the time?
Well, about 11:15 this morning, in an attempt to transfer Oswald to the county jail, we got as far as the basement of the City Hall, and a man lunged out of the crowd and fired one shot into his stomach.
Now, what were you doing? Were you escorting him?
Yes, I was helping to escort him at that time.
Were you holding on to his arm?
Yes, I had a hold of his left arm.
Now, there was another detective. He was handcuffed to Oswald?
Yes, Detective Lavelle was handcuffed to him with his left arm to Oswald's right arm.
When the man came out of the crowd and the shot was fired, what did you do?
Well, I grabbed his arm and took the pistol away from him.
Were there any screams?
I didn't hear any screams at that time.
The man, did he appear so quickly that preventive action could not have been taken?
Yes, he did. He was only a few feet. We were only a few feet from the newsmen that were right in front of us, and it was quite a large line of them, and he just lunged out of the line of men right into us.
Thank you very much, sir. It was Detective L.C. Graves, one of the men who was with Oswald when he was shot. This is Bill Lord reporting from Dallas City Hall.
There is still activity on the third floor of Dallas City Hall, where Jack Rubenstein, better known now as Jack Ruby, the accused slayer of Lee Oswald, is undergoing further interrogation. He has been formally charged with the murder of Oswald. Oswald was shot at approximately 11:15 this morning. He died at 1:07 at Portland Memorial Hospital. Once again, to bring you up to date, we would like to recap the actual incident, the actual shooting of Lee Oswald. We go back to that hour this morning, shortly before 11:15. The elevator bringing Oswald from the fourth floor jail cell to the lower level, the basement of City Hall. He is escorted out of the elevator, led by Chief Homicide Investigator Captain Will Fritz and other detectives and uniformed policemen. Oswald was to be transferred by armored car. Now watch. At that point, pandemonium broke out. As you saw, the assailant jumped out from the group of newsmen that had gathered around the scene and fired the one shot, striking Oswald in the abdomen, causing him to cry out. Oswald was then taken back inside the basement from the garage compound of City Hall and laid on the floor. An ambulance was called for, and Lee Oswald was rushed to Portland Memorial Hospital, where he spent an hour and a half on the operating table before he was pronounced dead. Ruby was apprehended by police immediately and hustled into an elevator to the familiar third-floor interrogation room, where Oswald had undergone questioning for several days, or for the past 2 days. Those scenes, the remarkable events that took place in Dallas today. This, the bewildered crowd of newsmen and photographers that tried to piece together the surprising events that took place within a matter of moments. It had been expected that here you see the ambulance arriving to take Lee Oswald out of City Hall to rush him to Portland Memorial Hospital. He never regained consciousness after he reached the hospital. He was able to make no deathbed statement of any kind. Doctors, a whole team of surgeons, worked feverishly for an hour and a half, massaging his heart after a cardiac arrest.
Here is the Oswald shooting once again, in stop action, frame by frame. You can see Jack Ruby come out from the right of the screen and pull the trigger.
This is Detective Jim Lavelle, who was this morning handcuffed to Oswald and was bringing him out to the car to be transferred to the county jail. Could you tell us what happened?
We were proceeding with the prisoner as scheduled from the jail office out to the ramp where the automobile was waiting. And as we reached the area where the car was parked, the man from the crowd emerged, and there was 100 or more newspapermen and cameramen in the area, and it was almost a solid wall of flesh in front of us and to our left, composed of the news media. When we came through the door with Oswald, they began taking their pictures, and in the issuing time that they were snapping pictures and talking, I saw this man come from the crowd, and at the time he emerged from this crowd of people, he was not more than 6 or 7 feet from me. And I dare say that had I known that he was going to be there, the swiftness with which it happened, I doubt if anyone could have prevented it.
Did you see the gun in his hand as he came?
I saw the gun in his hand as he emerged from the crowd. But being such a short distance from me, I had no time to say anything. I did jerk Oswald to try to drag him behind me.
Now, you were handcuffed to him?
I was handcuffed to him and also had a hold of the waistband of his trousers. I tried to jerk him behind me, but he had and I reached up and caught a hold of Jack Ruby's shoulder, left shoulder, and shoved back on him. At the same time pulling on Oswald. But he had this .38 snub-nosed pistol, and all he had to do was pull the trigger. It was a double-action gun, and therefore the whole episode only took a matter of a second to take place.
When Oswald fell to the ground, was he unconscious at that point?
I would say if he was not, he was nearly so. Just as soon as my partner on the other side, Mr. Graves, grabbed Jack's hand with the gun in such a manner that he couldn't fire it anymore.
Did he try to fire it again?
Yes, he was still, with his left hand, he had the gun in his right hand, he was trying to pull it around, and I could tell that he was still trying to snap the pistol. But Mr. Graves had it in such a manner that he couldn't fire it anymore.
Did you speak to the victim on the ground?
Yes, I immediately picked him up then with another officer, I don't remember who that was, and carried him back inside the jail office to get him away from the area. And I tried to talk to him and ask him if he could hear me and if he understood me. He never did answer me, and his eyes were partially closed. As far as I know, he never regained consciousness.
How has this affected the morale, the spirit of the police force?
Well, I think that I can probably speak for all the officers here. That I've heard many of them comment on it, and I think that they all feel very deeply about it. They regret the incident happening. We regret the shooting that occurred to the president on Friday, and certainly this hasn't helped their feelings any at all. Mr. Ruby didn't better our cause any by shooting Oswald.
Did you recognize him when he came through?
Yes, I have known Jack Ruby for a number of years, and I recognized him just as soon as he emerged from the crowd.
But even if you knew he was coming, you say you didn't have the time to react to prevent it.
He was so close from the human wall of flesh of reporters there that it would have been impossible to have stopped him.
Thank you very much, Detective. The story of what happened when Lee Harvey Oswald was killed this morning. This is Bill Lord reporting from the Dallas Police Station.
Also here in the studio, WFAA News Director Bob Walker. Bob, what's new?
Just learned from City Hall from a very authoritative source that police are working on the assumption that there indeed is a connection between Jack Ruby and Lee Oswald, and that in some manner of speaking, Oswald's murder was to shut him up. Also, they have said that they will not release in the immediate future at all any of the information the FBI has gathered which led them to believe so strongly that Oswald had assassinated the president. But the police and investigation now is working on the assumption that there is a definite connection between Lee Oswald and Jack Ruby, and the successful attempt on Oswald's life was an attempt to shut him up. This word from a reliable source at City Hall.
Adding, Bob, I might say even more confusion to the story. The circumstances that have taken place in Dallas the past few days would certainly indicate that there were no clear-cut defining points involved in the initial assassination. Now this only compounds it. It will be remarkable to find when the story is eventually known what actually did happen. We understand that an Assistant Attorney General from Washington, Jack Miller Jr., is en route to Dallas to confer with federal agents here and the Dallas City Police. That's the report till now. Roger Sharp reporting from WFAA TV in Dallas. Now back to New York.
There were lots of questions everyone wanted answered. Just who was Jack Ruby, and why would he want to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald? Reporters sought out those who were close to him.
This is Tony Zoppi, who is the only newspaper man to talk to the sister of Jack Ruby after she visited with him in his cell. What did you gain from this?
She went up to see Jack about an hour ago, and I asked her what they talked about and how he was feeling and how did he look. And she said, "What can you tell on a phone through a glass?" I have a couple of notes here, which I'll just read extemporaneously if you want. She said he called her right after the president was shot and went over, and she said, "I could see he was extremely emotional. He called his brother in Detroit and broke out crying over the phone." Mrs. Grant, that's Jack Ruby's sister, said that their father died 5 years ago in Chicago, but Jack took the president's death even harder than his own father's death. She said he refused to eat all day Friday and just bought the papers and kept reading about this thing over and over again. And he kept talking about Jackie Kennedy and the Kennedy children. And he said it was ironic that the president was a man who could have done anything he wanted to do in life. He was qualified to do anything he wanted to do, and he had to wind up this way. He just couldn't get over that. And he kept asking his sister if she needed anything. He's still very concerned. They're from a very close-knit, old-fashioned type family, and he seemed more concerned about her, really. And he urged her to take care of herself and not to worry. He said, "I'm in good health." And they didn't discuss the shooting at all. He said the FBI and the officers up in the city jail here are treating him well. And he says, "I have friends." And she noted that when she was very young, around 16 years old, and she's 55 today, Jack is 2 years younger than she is, and she told how they grew up together in a very tough neighborhood in Chicago, and he was always very protective and would walk her through the neighborhood and make sure that she got home all right and that sort of thing.
Was it mentioned that Ruby received a Western Union telegram today, or money order?
No, nothing was mentioned about that. She said, I'll quote this, it's quite a quote, she said, "He loved every president, that's the problem." In other words, he had this intense feeling, very proud of, he's a first-generation American, and his parents came from Poland, and he was very, very proud of the President Eisenhower, Truman, all of them. He was very fond of Truman, it seems, because this was sort of a self-made man, and Jack has only had 2 years of high school education, and he was quite impressed that someone like Mr. Truman, who doesn't have a college education, could have gained the highest office in the land. There are 8 children in the Ruby family, and 5 of them have college educations. She said her father was, quote, a very religious old Jewish carpenter.
This is the sister's father.
Jack and his sister, yes. And said Jack was very religious. As a matter of fact, he went to the synagogue yesterday afternoon. He attends the Shereth Israel congregation here in Dallas. And she termed her brother an easy touch in that she said oftentimes he leaves home with money to pay bills, and he'll go down the street and people along the way will ask him for money and he'll stop and give it, and by the time he gets to the place where he's supposed to pay his bills, he doesn't have enough money left to pay them. And she said she was invited to lunch today and was getting dressed when the news came over the television that her brother had shot Oswald, and she went into hysterics. She said yesterday Jack spent the afternoon watching television here on Channel 8, and he was watching the playback of the Kennedy years, and she said he cried throughout the show. He was extremely emotional. And she said her brother called minutes after he learned of the president's death, and he was sick. A newsman here in town called him immediately following the assassination of President Kennedy and wanted to know if Jack Ruby was going to close his nightclubs. He has 2 nightclubs here, and they wanted to know if he was going to close down for the night. And he said not only was he going to close for the night, but he had decided to close for 3 nights and possibly 4. He said, how could anyone go night clubbing at a time like this? And in closing, after he hung up from that conversation, and let me say this, as a nightclub editor, I know it takes quite a bit of money to operate one of these things and close them down because you've still got expenses. You have your rent and your floor show and your band and all to pay. And he told his sister, he says, we ain't got no money, but we don't need it that bad.
And that's the story.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Okay.
Another look at the man who killed Mr. Oswald. This is Bill Lord reporting from the City Hall.
Jetta, how long did you know Jack Ruby?
I knew Jack Ruby for approximately 4, 5, 6 months.
In what relationship?
I was employed as the feature at the Carousel Club, and I had known Jack before I went to work there, and I had a slight hassle with Jack, and I had left, and that was the end of my association with Jack.
What kind of a man was he?
Jack Ruby was a fanatic. He was a very nervous man, a very violent man. He would cause hassles and harassments and always running around, very energetic.
Would you say he had a violent streak in him?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Yes, he would get carried away by something and lose all rational thinking. He would just go off, zoom, and just... he had to prove something. He had to be somebody.
I've heard some stories about him being a rather generous type. They tell a story that when a customer at one of his clubs would call for a taxi cab, Jack would put 50 cents aside in the event the customer left, and then the cab driver would come up and have to go away empty-handed. He'd give him the 50 cents. Does this square with his character as you knew it?
Oh, yes. Jack was almost a dual nature. He would be very nice. He was very helpful to me. He would change completely then, and the next minute you'd be his worst enemy, and he'd be against you, and he wanted everybody to support him against you, and it was a very irrational man, very emotional.
Did he always carry a gun?
I don't know him that well, but I have seen him with a gun, and I presume he carried it every night. It seemed to be a habit of his.
What about politics? Did he seem interested in politics, particularly regarding the Kennedys?
I have heard Jack talk about the Kennedys, and I've been trying to think, and it's so confusing today, but I believe he disliked Bobby Kennedy.
No recollection of what he had ever said about the president?
Yes, he followed that statement up about Bobby with something about Jack Kennedy, but I can't, for the minute, just form it in my mind.
Do you think that Jack Ruby is a type of man that was capable of killing the assassin of President Kennedy out of love for Kennedy, out of political motives?
I don't think he loved Kennedy that much. I don't know why he would do it. I'd say he would be perfectly capable of an act like that, very much so.
But the reasons for it, those are hard to pin down, as the portrait of Jack Ruby emerges piece by piece. This is Paul Good, ABC in Dallas.
Will you give me your name, please?
Joy Dale.
Joy, what do you do?
I dance at the carousel.
When you say dance, what kind of dance? What do you mean?
Well, we prefer exotic dancing.
You're an exotic dancer at the carousel, owned and operated by Jack Ruby.
That's right.
How long have you been working for Jack Ruby?
Approximately 3 months.
Are you a Dallas girl?
Yes, I am.
What do you think of Jack?
I think he's a very swell person.
Did you start dancing? Did you start your career at the Carousel Club under the tutelage of Jack Ruby?
No, I didn't.
Started somewhere else and then moved here?
Yes, I did.
You say Jack is a wonderful person. What do you mean he's a wonderful person?
I know him as a friend and as a boss also, and I've known many people that he has given a helping hand that needed it, and it's...
As an example?
Well, I have a friend right now that came to Dallas unemployed, not knowing anyone, had met Jack once. Jack gave him a place to stay until he found him a job, gave him money to live off of until he went to work, until he could move out. Another girl that works in the club now is a waitress. She was in Florida. He sent her money to come back with her children and gave her money to live on until she was back up on her feet and able to work.
Has Jack helped you in any particular way?
No, but he has been a very good friend.
What kind of a man was he to work for? Was he an emotional man? Did he have fits of temper? Did he often blow up about nothing, or was he the level-headed type?
Jack is a very emotional person, like people know. All the people that know him as an emotional person. He does blow off easily, but he usually has a reason behind him, and a good reason. He usually will stop and think about it. But if you don't yell back at Jack, he'll never yell at you.
Someone said earlier that Jack was the kind of person, if he liked you all the way, and if he did not like you, he did not like you all the way. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I believe that's true.
Have you seen any evidence of this? Have you seen people that Jack did not like and the way he reacted?
Yes, I have.
Would you tell us about him?
Well, in certain instance, a person said something that maybe Jack didn't approve of, but Jack would say so.
Straightforward.
Straightforward. And Jack's the type of person, if he likes you, there's not anything he won't do to help you in any way, money or just by being a pal. In a lot of ways, it's hard to just sit here and say.
You like Jack Ruby?
Yes, I like Jack Ruby.
It was said earlier, I believe, that one of the performers there at the Carousel recognized Oswald in the audience. Is this possible?
I'd say this is very hard to do because of the lighting in the club is very dim. And when you're on the stage, which I am 7 nights a week, that the light is right in your eyes. Myself, I wear glasses. I can't see very far without them. And so I say this, you can't see beyond this, the people sitting right around the first of the stage, even with perfect eyesight.
Yeah, then I take it that you're saying that it is a possibility, but it's an improbability that you could recognize anyone in the audience.
He would have to be sitting right on the runway to recognize him.
By runway, you mean?
The edge of the stage.
The edge of the stage. Did you ever see Mr. Oswald at any time in the Carousel?
No.
You have never heard of Mr. Oswald before?
No, I have not.
Well, it would be interesting. You are a friend of Jack Ruby. Did you hear it on the radio, television? How did you receive word that Jack Ruby is accused of the slaying today?
I was over at a friend's house. We were listening to the radio. And when they said that a short, gray-headed man, slightly bald, had just shot Oswald, that he was a nightclub owner, Well, first of all, I said that it sounds like Jack.
But you didn't believe it?
No, it's hard to believe because I talked to Jack Friday afternoon. It's approximately, I tell you, it was 3 o'clock, a little after 3, when I went into the club because dancing, I was giving a girl lessons. It's just beginning.
Friday after, that was right after the president was killed.
Right after the president. I had been to the hospital. My little girl had an apartment there, and I was taking her out to the hospital, and then I came back to the club, and Jack was there, and he was very upset. And
Did he say anything? What did he say about the assassination of Mr. Kennedy? What did he have to say?
At first, nothing much, but Jack's, like I said, isn't an emotional man, but I never thought I'd see Jack cry. And tears did come from Jack's eyes. And he said, it's something that's unbelievable. How could a man shoot the president of our country?
This was Friday late, around 3 o'clock?
This is a little after 3 o'clock. I'd say 5 or 10 minutes afterward.
Did he close up the club that night?
Yes, he did. He said the club won't be open. I think under the circumstance that I should close the club tonight and tomorrow night. I don't know how long. But Jack is a person that thinks very highly of the Kennedys. And I myself said Friday, I said, being a mother, I said, can you possibly think how this woman feels? She just lost her son, and now she's lost her husband. And Jack said he should be killed, that's all.
Is that what he said to you?
Yes.
That he should be killed?
And it wasn't maybe the exact words, but it was very similar.
Now, this was Friday night, and when he announced to you that the club would be closed because of the assassination of Mr. Kennedy, he said to you once again, what did he say?
When I mentioned Jacqueline Kennedy and her children and how she must feel about her husband, he said, yes, he ought to be killed. He ought to be killed. And, I have heard other people say this besides Jack. I myself says, well, he's about the lowest, the man that killed Kennedy.
What's going to happen to you now, Joy?
That I don't know.
Thank you very much.
And who was the man Ruby shot? People knew very little about Lee Harvey Oswald. Aside from getting a couple of quick quips from him in the hallway at police headquarters, reporters hadn't talked with the accused presidential assassin. And they hadn't talked much with his wife, mother, or brother either.
Mrs. Payne, how did you first become acquainted with the Oswalds?
I met them through friends at a party last winter, and then saw more of Marina later. I was interested in talking with her because I was trying to learn the language. Then later they had financial difficulty when he lost his work, and eventually led to my inviting her to live with me in Dallas while she was waiting for her baby that was born in October, and to stay on a couple of months with me, just as one woman with another can help when babies are small. And then I think they expected to get an apartment together when they could afford it, say after Christmas sometime.
Where were you with Mrs. Oswald when the news of the president's death came?
We were both sitting on the sofa. We had been watching the morning proceedings on the television, and I translated to her when I heard it that he had been shot and the blood spurted from him. And I was crying and she was very upset. Indeed, this was our condition when men came from the police department in Dallas. And that was the first that we had any indication that her husband was associated with this tragic event. She said to me after we had been at the police station, she could not imagine her husband doing anything of this sort. He never said anything that she heard derogatory about the president. Indeed, her opinions had been formed much by what he said to her in translation from the news media, and her opinion was very favorable. I think she felt, as we all do, that the terrible loss to our nation and to the world.
In the meetings in which you encountered Mr. Oswald, did you ever feel that something like this would transpire?
No, not at all. I saw him as he came to visit her here. He was then a husband and father, played with his little girl, helped feed her supper. I still can't imagine that he could do anything as violent, as premeditated as he must have done. I think if he planned it ahead, it was planned on very short notice, that he suddenly realized he had an opportunity to no longer be a little guy, but to be someone extraordinary. I think probably I will always have terrible if-only feelings, along with many Secret Service men and many people of the nation, anyone who's ever had any contact with these people, to say, if only I had done something. But this was, as far as I was concerned, utterly without warning, utterly, to me yet, without explanation.
Mrs. Payne, you had been reluctant to speak to television cameras before this evening. Is there any particular reason for that?
Yes, I think it's a terrible thing to judge a man before he is brought to trial. And in this case, it's a very difficult thing not to do. The evidence was so incriminating, and just as we, all of us, the nation, saw it on the television, I began to wonder how they would ever get a jury that could give him an impartial trial. But now, of course, he's dead. He has been, in effect, judged quickly and hanged. And there's no question of prejudicing people by what we say now. The difficulty of saying anything that wouldn't tend to prejudice an entire nation already very upset and wanting to, quite rightly, to bring to justice as soon as possible the man who'd done this terrible thing. I felt the more attention was given this man, Lee Oswald, the less were the chances of of due process being carried out, of his having a trial in which he would be innocent until proved guilty at that trial, which is always a problem.
What type of a man did you picture Lee Harvey Oswald as?
I saw him primarily as the father here. He was quiet, hard to get to know at first. I didn't feel I knew him well at all until I did see how much he was concerned about his finances when he was out of work and got his last unemployment check and had no signs of a job ahead of him and a baby on the way. He had all the feelings, I think, of any father that doesn't know where he's going to get the money to support his family. And of course it was this difficult economic situation that brought about the fact that I offered my help as a woman to Marina while she was expecting her child. I didn't see him as a fanatic or a person about to do a wild thing, or even who could. I was surprised to learn that he had a gun.
Was there any particular reason, do you feel, why he couldn't find work up until that time? Was he flighted?
Well, the main reason, I think, is that he had only a high school education, did not have a license to drive a car, which limited where he could apply and the kind of work he could do. And there are a good many unskilled unemployed in Texas now. So that it just really was difficult. I don't think it was a matter of his political views that interfered with his finding a job.
Do you think his past problems at 20 years old going to the Soviet Union, did he ever indicate that this may have had something to do with his lack of employment?
I wondered myself whether it did. I think it might have had something to do with his being fired. I don't think it had anything to do with his not being hired. This is not something a person looking for a laborer looks into. He wasn't applying to jobs that would require security clearance or anything looking into his past. He was simply looking for a minimum wage and a salary to keep his family on.
What type of work did he enjoy most doing?
he did enjoy doing some photographic layout work that he had been doing in Dallas. He didn't talk much about his work. Indeed, we talked very little, he and I together. I saw him here, but we had little opportunity and little inclination, really, to talk to one another.
You were in very few social commitments with him or in social circles, but did he at any time indicate any overboard feelings one way or the other in talking with people?
I did feel that he was very rigid in his thinking about some doctrines that I cannot understand at all. I do think he was a book Marxist, had read the books and thought that this was the way it should be, that capitalism was a bad system. I felt as he talked that there's no point in arguing with this man. If he thinks that he is out to be exploited, I think that's more the comment of a man who feels a little bit persecuted by life than a rational and of points that he could substantiate in fact. I just observed to myself, here's a man who feels that life has been tough and he hasn't got a proper deal out of it. I hoped that he might feel that life was generous. I hoped indeed that he might feel some generosity here in what he received from me for his wife. I really hoped that he might feel some ease of this discontent he did feel in the existing society, just by easing, if his own heart could feel ease. But I guess I'm no psychologist. I suppose it's just all too late when a man is 24 to change his feelings about the way life is, or the way he expects it to treat him.
How is Mrs. Oswald? What were her feelings? Did she ever express them to you in conversation about this country?
Yes, she likes this country very much. She would like very much to stay here and raise her children here. She has felt people very friendly. She's a person who would easily make friends if she knew the language, and I think as she learns the language will make friends. Of course, this event will make a great problem for her there. But she expressed to me Friday evening after we had come from the police station that she was very worried that this might prevent her staying in the United States. She would prefer to stay here.
Mrs. Payne, has Mrs. Oswald ever encountered any anti-Russian feeling here in the United States?
No, she said people were universally very kind to her. She was very impressed with the neighborliness of this street and the way my neighbor would offer something for the baby or bring back something I'd loaned to her. This very natural friendliness and generosity with one's own goods. In Russia, things are harder to come by. You can't always go to the store and get baby shoes when you want them. They're just not there to be bought. And here, you can not only go to the store and buy them when you want them, but friends and neighbors offer you the loan of many things. And she was very happy to see this kind of generosity so much in evidence before her.
At one time, people had speculated, as this case developed, that because Mr. and Mrs. Oswald were living apart, that there were marital difficulties. Did you feel that this was the case, or did you ever see anything like that?
They did quarrel some, but I felt that was the quarreling that happens in many marital relations, that they did want to get an apartment when it was financially feasible for them. He was glad, I think, that she could be with another woman during the time of the birth of the baby and when the baby was so small. But there were no real marital difficulties that I knew of between them.
Did Lee Oswald ever express his feelings about the Soviet Union when he came back? Did he reminisce about the things he had seen there?
I heard him speak once at the same party where I first met him and his wife. Talked to the group there about having been there. I recall he was critical, or at least talked about the censorship that he experienced there. letters from his brother that he never got, learned later about. But and of course he did express a wish to come back. But just what he truly felt about the system, I never did know.
Did he ever express any thoughts about Cuba?
Not to me, no, not at any time.
Mrs. Payne, you were with Mrs. Oswald when the news of the president's death was broadcast. Did she indicate any feelings to you at that time?
She said to me how terrible she felt this was for Mrs. Kennedy. What a terrible thing to lose her husband. What a terrible thing for the two children not to have their father. And then again, later, after we had been to the police station, we talked that evening, Friday evening. She said to me, I never could have imagined when I was talking to you about my sympathies for Mrs. Kennedy that I too might be losing my husband, that my children would be without a father.
Mr. Payne, you had occasion to engage in conversation with Lee Oswald at a few times. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, when I first heard of Lee, I was sort of looked forward to with eagerness to an opportunity to talk with someone with whom I didn't believe I would agree, but at least it was interesting to talk to a man who had been to Russia and apparently had his own opinions. I tried about 4 times, perhaps 3 or 4 times, to talk in a serious manner with him. Eventually I gave up for the reason that I thought he was not influenced by logic, or didn't let the present reality influence his rather dogmatic way of thinking. And it was therefore useless to talk with him.
What type of feeling did you get about his thinking, though?
Well, he told me that he became a Marxist in this country by reading books and without ever having met a communist. And then he went to Russia, decided he wanted to go to Russia, he told me, and told me he didn't like Russia then, as wanted to return to this country. And I asked him then if he didn't like Russia and like this country, why did he want to change this country to make it like Russia? And he mentioned repeatedly this principle of his, that he objected to the exploitation of man by man. And this he thought was a moral question. And so we argued. I suggested that in the Soviet Union, by which he means this exploitation of man by man, is that any time that one man makes profit by another man's labor, that is, the first man is exploiting the second man. And that happens every time in every business, every employer and employee relationship, supposedly. But I suggested the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. There was a taxation of every working man's labor there, and the Soviet state took it. This didn't bother him, though. The difference being that in the Soviet Union, so far as in our discussion, it boiled down to this small difference, that in the Soviet Union, that was decided by a person who didn't stand to gain by the decision. A man's wages were set by a man who didn't gain by that decision. In this country, presumably if the employer sets a high wage, or a low wage rather, he will stand to make more profit by it. However, in this country, he would not then object to supposing there were 2 companies. One was run inefficiently, and he employed his employees, we'll say, at the minimum wage, and didn't make any profit. And another man ran his company very efficiently and could give his employees wages of $2 an hour, but made, we'll say, made a 50% profit on it. In that case, that man, in his estimation, was evil, even though the employee made much more money. Everybody made more money. This, it seemed to me, when his total concern hinged upon a small principle of this sort, and was utterly unrelated to the realities of how much the man made, or his standard of living, or his happiness. Seemed to me both illogical, or rather, it didn't have, we could no longer talk on that subject.
Did you feel at any time that this type of feeling were the reasons why he wasn't able to find work? Did you?
Yes, I felt that he was perfectly aware of this relationship with his, here's purely conjecture, that he probably felt, I know he felt this relationship to his employer, and he may have voiced it, or he may have shown it in his scorn, which is the way he approached most people, so they felt it. He was aware of it, even if he didn't speak of it to his employer.
Did he wear his, let's say, Marxist views as a badge? Did he use them to gain attention at any time, or were they just there to be talked over?
With me, he spoke very freely, and he complained that with other people he couldn't, they wouldn't talk about political subjects. He would talk about nothing else. Now I read in the papers that he didn't talk with anybody else, or didn't generally talk freely, so I couldn't answer that question. I would say he was the kind of person who likes to put himself in a position of belligerence.
Mr. Payne, did Lee Oswald's political philosophy at any time indicate to you that he may have been capable of the crime he's accused of?
I was very surprised. When I heard that the shot had been fired from the building in which I knew he worked, I thought of him immediately, but dismissed it because I didn't think he was that irrational. I don't see how this act of killing President Kennedy will help any cause that he professed or loved. Certainly, it doesn't help the Soviet Union in any way that I can see. Neither had he ever expressed any animosity to the president. He didn't like, he liked very few people, but he didn't, I expressed my appreciation of President Kennedy, and he didn't ever argue with me on that point. So it was a surprise to me how this happened. I think it's a lone wolf thing. It was the opportunity presented itself to him, and he probably wanted to make a mark on society by suddenly occurred to him that he could.
Of course, rumors are hard to pin down, but at this time they do feel that this was there is a possibility of his part in an international conspiracy. You don't feel that way at all?
I felt he was a very lonely person and was not aware of any other, his being connected with any other group was probably still as unfamiliar with communists after coming back from Russia as he had been by his report before he went. So that I would not agree with it. That was not my impression.
Did you ever have a chance to talk about Cuban communism or Castro communism? Did he ever express any thoughts on that?
He did mention that, and it was unfamiliar to me, so I didn't take it up. He just happened to mention it briefly, and when it was brought to my attention, I did recall that he had said such a thing. But I don't believe even Castro, who might have the most reason for disliking Kennedy, can see where there's any gain to him by the death of Kennedy. So it looked to me like a stupid, irrational act.
It is still late Sunday night, November 24th, 1963. Tomorrow, funeral services for the President of the United States will be held in Washington. In Dallas, people are still in shock over what's happened to his accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald.
Roger Sharp reporting. This is City Hall in Dallas this night after yet another day of almost unbelievable events. At this hour last night, Lee Harvey Oswald, accused assassin, was locked under heavy guard in the jail cell on the 4th floor of this building. Tonight, Lee Oswald is dead and another man, Jack Ruby, is jailed. On the 4th floor, he is the accused assassin of Lee Oswald. These names and these facts are tonight entwined in a maze of confusing fact, rumor, and speculation. ABC's Bill Lord is standing by at City Hall, and we will be going to him in a matter of minutes. Today's events came to life early this morning at approximately 11:10, as city police were preparing to transfer Lee Oswald from the City Hall jail to the county courthouse jail, some 10 blocks away and almost directly across from the scene of the assassination of President Kennedy on Friday. From a late film report of the events today, let's look at exactly what happened. It was about 11:15 this morning when Lee Oswald was brought down from the jail cell on the 4th floor, down the elevator of the City Hall building to the basement level, where he was to be transferred under guard to a waiting armored car for the 10-block trip. Outside, several hundred spectators. Will Fritz, Captain Will Fritz, chief homicide interrogator, and other detectives were with him. Now watch closely now as the man steps in and fires. At that point, pandemonium broke out. Police immediately grabbed the man who stepped before Lee Oswald and fired one single shot into his stomach. Oswald cried out. Police reached him on the floor of the garage and carried him back inside and laid him on the floor of City Hall's basement. An ambulance was rushed to the scene. And the assailant, Jack Rubenstein, age 52, known as Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner, was arrested as the alleged killer. At this point, Lee Oswald was alive as they awaited the ambulance. These scenes showing some of the confusion, the stark horror on the faces of many who couldn't believe what they had witnessed. Even seasoned reporters and newsmen on the scene were confused, stunned by the event. The minutes passed by, waiting for the ambulance, as word flashed throughout the city that Oswald had been shot. The ambulance arrived to take Oswald from City Hall to Portland Memorial Hospital. He had been planning to travel in an armored car under protection to another jail cell. Bleeding and unconscious. Now, by slow scan television, we will recreate the actual event, the actual firing of the bullet. Watch very closely as we go to this second film showing exactly what happened. Watch the reporter holding the microphone on the right of your television screen. As that microphone goes in, a flashbulb goes off, and the assailant steps into the picture in front of Oswald and fires. Another flashbulb. Oswald falls to the ground. You saw him wince. He screamed. Police immediately grabbed the man, the assailant, identified later as Jack Ruby, the man accused of killing Lee Oswald. We now understand that on the 3rd floor of City Hall at this exact moment, ABC's Bill Lord is standing by with a late report.
There are now 2 infamous locations here in Dallas. Less than 60 hours ago, the President of the United States was being warmly greeted by Big D. The term Big D seldom heard here anymore. The corner of Houston and Elm Streets became famous or infamous immediately. The spot where the President was shot by assassin's bullets. Here, on the basement level of the city municipal building, another infamous spot. For it was here that the man police accused of murdering the President and a Dallas police officer and wounding the governor of the state was killed. Killed by a man named Jack Ruby. An already grieving nation was shocked once again. Lee Oswald lived 48 hours and 7 minutes longer than the President of the United States. The accused assassin was pronounced dead in the same hospital where Dallas doctors valiantly attempted to save the President's life. What happened here today was absolutely impossible, according to police and according to newsmen. The area was very secure. There were police in every possible corner. Yet this ring of security was broken by a man who lunged out between photographers and shot the man who was accused of killing the President. When Lee Oswald was driven out of here in an ambulance, people on the street were heard to cheer and applaud. For one moment, their real feelings had been unmasked. Later, when I talked to them, they said, well, we are upset over this violent act. Yet few of them would express any concern for Oswald's health. The transfer of Oswald was announced in advance. They said it would be approximately 10 o'clock today. It occurred shortly after 11. This advance publicity might have been a contributing factor. The presence of the news media encouraged the police to cooperate fully. They thought of getting Oswald out a back door, but they decided not to. They wanted to cooperate. No one can rewrite history, but we can all hope that the lessons learned here in Dallas during these past 3 days will teach us something, and that history will not again be written by assassins. This is Bill Lord reporting from the municipal building in Dallas. Returning you now to Roger Sharp.
Continuing our recreation of the events of this yet another unbelievable day in Dallas, Lee Oswald, as you saw in our earlier film, was rushed from City Hall to Portland Memorial Hospital. He is shown in these scenes arriving at the hospital. The time now is approximately 11:32 a.m. He is taken to emergency room 2, trauma room 2, just a few feet from emergency room 1, trauma room 1, where President Kennedy had died almost exactly 2 days before these unbelievable pictures. Lee Oswald never regained consciousness. At 1:07, Chief Surgeon Dr. Tom Shires met newsmen on the first floor of the hospital. Chief Surgeon, you make this statement.
Get up. Step up, Doctor. Somebody want to ask a question?
Talk a little louder, Doctor.
Is he alive, Doctor? No. Let Dr. Shires make his statement, please.
When did he die, Doctor?
He died at 1:07 our time, 13:07, of his gunshot wound. Would you like to ask questions or what? Yeah, Mr. Oswald died at 1:07 our time in the operating room of the gunshot wound which he had received.
Would you describe his last moments on the operating table, please?
The last moments were rather hectic. He had a cardiac arrest from all the massive blood loss and massive injury. The last few minutes were spent in cardiac resuscitation, open heart massage, electrical defibrillation, internal defibrillation, and finally there were absolutely no signs of life at all, fixed dilated pupils and all the signs of death.
How many surgeons were working on him at the time?
There were 4 actually operating scrubbed at the same time, besides the others.
How long after the cardiac arrest did he die?
I don't really know. I imagine 20 or 30 minutes.
Did he ever talk to you or say anything?
No, he never regained consciousness at all. In fact, before surgery, we had no blood pressure, a few agonal respiratory efforts, and that was all. During the operation, once we got control of the major vessels, the aorta, the vena cava, the kidney injury, we had a blood pressure for a time, but then we had the cardiac arrest, which was obviously incident to massive blood loss, the anoxia that had occurred. This was, again, a fatal wound that he received.
Was there ever any...
The Russian wife of Lee Oswald leaves the hospital after his death with Oswald's mother. Oswald's brother was also in the scene, on the scene. There's the first scene we had after the apprehension of Jack Ruby. Ruby being led into the interrogation room on the third floor again of City Hall. Ruby, the owner of a nightclub, Carousel.
Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade no longer has to worry about prosecuting accused presidential assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. Now he will try Jack Ruby in court for murdering Oswald.
Although charges have been filed, it will be presented to a grand jury on Rubin. We'll probably immediately within the next week, and it'll probably be tried around the middle of January.
Has the district attorney's office closed its investigation of the assassination of the president?
Before sending the gun to Washington?
Before.
Before sending the gun to Washington?
Yes.
Do you think it was unusual for Jack Ruby to be in that crowd?
I don't pass on that. Unusual to be in that crowd? I don't.
Reports that had been...
Well, I haven't been here since last night, so I don't know anything about today's happening.
How do you feel about not being able to try Oswald as the killer of the president?
Well, we will try Ruby and ask the death penalty on him about the same time.
Well, how about
I don't want to go into whys or wherefores on anything.
Has your office closed its investigation into the death of President Kennedy?
No, sir. The investigation will continue on that with a basis toward, and we have no concrete evidence that anyone assisted him in this, but the investigation, I'm sure, will go on with reference to any possible accomplice or people that assisted him in it.
Do you have a suspicion now that there were?
I have no concrete evidence or suspicions at present.
Thank you.
Would you be willing to say, with all this evidence, that it is now beyond a reasonable doubt at all that Oswald was the killer of President Kennedy?
I would say that without any doubt he's the killer. The law says beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty, which there's no question that he was the killer of President Kennedy.
That case is closed in your mind?
As far as Oswald's concerned, yes.
Mr. Ray, will we be able to have copies of the photographs showing Oswald?
If you have them, you'll have to get them from the Dallas police.
What do you think was the motive of Ruby?
I don't know. I haven't talked with him.
What do you feel is the strongest evidence in that list?
Well, it's like any case based on a series of circumstances. They all have to fit together. You put a man in the window with a gun. People cannot positively identify him from the ground. He fits their general description. You have his fingerprints there. You have the shells there. You have his gun that he purchased.
What do you think was Oswald's motive?
Can't answer that.
The question was, what do you found any fluctuation in Oswald's bank account or his finances?
I know nothing about that. Yes, sir. Both of them. That was found by the Dallas police.
How do you explain there were no fingerprints?
They were co-workers that left him there around 12 o'clock to go to eat lunch. Now, I didn't mention that. The witnesses put him on the 4th floor at 12 o'clock and shortly thereafter.
The
6th floor, where the box is.
What did you say, the ballistics?
This was the gun, the bullet from this gun killed the president.
Is that from the FBI, sir?
I can't go into anything from the FBI. I'm not at liberty to.
The story that Oswald and Ruby were previously appointed.
I think I heard it on radio or something, but I don't know anything about it.
We have a chance to talk to Ruby.
I have not talked with. No, sir, I've not talked with either one of them.
Well, will we get a chance to talk
Okay, Dick.
I don't know anything about that.
Did you know-
This was entirely about going over the evidence that I thought some of you would want.
Did you know Ruby before this?
No, sir. Saw him in this very same room Friday night when we had the defendant up
To
here.
a steak party for the Texas Bar Association in the Adolphus Hotel. Were you there?
No, sir, I wasn't there. As a matter of fact, if some of you will recall, he asked a question from out here in the audience, or answered a question. He's standing right back here, and I didn't know who he was. I thought he was a member of the press, and he told me as we walked out of here that he was a nightclub operator here.
What question did he ask?
What?
What question did he ask?
I don't remember, but maybe it was an answer, but he said something.
Remember it was Friday night when I asked you to do an interview with me on the phone, and you had another call, and Ruby was hanging around in the background. You were on the phone, and I said, and then you had to go away, and I asked Ruby, because he seemed to me like a detective. He seemed to be all over this place. I said, would you see if you could get him on the phone over to here now? And he went around, and he got you, and he brought you over to my telephone.
It might have been where he told me who he was. I didn't know who he was either. I think someone here answered that question in that he answered a question. Somebody asked something, and he answered it back there, and I don't know what it was. I think it is some question about a street or an address or a name or something.
You look to me like you're a good friend. I don't know what it is.
Do you feel that list is complete, or anything is withheld by government agencies?
This is all that I know of. Yes.
Mr. Wade, in arguing this case, what would you use as a theory as to his motive?
Again, a question about a motive.
Well, of course, that has to develop. You have to develop that from all of the evidence. And I can't go into motive. It depends on what you can get in evidence. If you get everything that's been written in the papers in evidence, you could put a pretty good motive there. But a lot of that I don't think would be admissible.
What can you tell us?
And you've got to base your motive on what you have before the jury.
What can you tell us so far about your investigation of Jack Ruby?
I haven't had anything to do with it. I know nothing about it.
Will you be involved?
I will try and prosecute it.
The Justice Department heading up that investigation?
As far as I know, the Dallas police is.
How would you evaluate the work of the Dallas police in investigating the death of the president?
I think the Dallas police did an excellent job on this, and before midnight on when he was killed, had the man in custody and had sufficient evidence, what I think, to convict him.
Mr. Wade, you identified the gun positively as the one that was purchased from the hand of the gun here, was there?
It can be positively identified.
Serial number deal?
Serial number.
Serial by serial number?
Serial number.
And manifest?
And both that and on the scope, too.
You bought the scope also?
No, the scope was on the gun, but of course a different person makes it, a different company makes the scope.
When he bought the gun, did he buy the gun with the scope?
Scope was on it when it was purchased.
Do you know what kind of gun it was?
I don't have the exact, it is a foreign-made gun of a...
5/10 millimeter.
It's six...
Is that correct?
It's a 6 5/10 millimeter, and I understand is a used gun of Italian make, probably. But
Do you see that
Did the scope go to mail order house too?
it was mounted, as I understand it, when it came.
Do you see that the easy availability of guns such as this requires new and more stringent laws?
That is an old question that's been off. It's obvious you didn't have any guns. You probably wouldn't have any murders with guns. But it's nearly impossible to keep a person who wants to kill from finding a gun somewhere.
Do you know Oswald's activities 9 or 10 days ago?
I never heard of him until he was arrested and brought in here.
Mr. Wade, the State Department put out some information in Washington that related the importance of telling this evidence to the American people to a situation that's developing in Russia. And the Russian Marxists mentioned in relation to Oswald's background. Can you tell us anything in your evidence that related to a Marxist background for this man?
No, sir, I can't. There's some things found on him, like newspapers and things that didn't necessarily connect him with the organizations, like Communist Daily Worker or something. I don't think you can necessarily say he was fact he read it doesn't necessarily mean that he couldn't prove that he belonged to it. I've read quite a bit about this subject. I know what you're talking about, but I've read interviews from reporters from over in Russia, all on this subject, that apparently they know quite a bit more about it than I do.
Was there material found here related directly to the case?
There's no material that said he belonged to any group other than this Fair Play for Cuba that I know of.
Nothing found in his room, no material there?
Well, there's lots of material dealing with that movement found.
Henry, were you ever able to ascertain whether he went to Washington and took part in the House Un-American Activities Committee riots?
I know nothing about that. I don't think he told anybody he was, and I don't know of any, not to my knowledge. Now, I assume someone has been trying to check that, but I don't know anything on that subject.
Did Ruby do that? Were you answering about Ruby?
No, this about Oswald, wasn't it? I don't know of anything on either one of them up there, for that matter.
On Monday morning in the nation's capital, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, is laid to rest. For everyone who attends or watches on television, it's an event that will never be forgotten. The caissons, the riderless horse symbolizing the nation's fallen leader, the drums, and the sight of the President's young son offering a final salute, all indelibly planted in one's memory.
There was a funeral of a very different sort today in nearby Fort Worth. A funeral conducted in semi-secrecy under heavy police guard and the watchful eye of numerous FBI and Secret Service men. The undertaker told us he did not know who would pay for the service, but that he planned to bill the United States Secret Service, which had contacted him about the funeral service. This was the dreary funeral of Lee Harvey Oswald, alleged murderer of President Kennedy. There were only two floral arrangements visible at the services, one of red carnations and the other of white carnations. Burial was in an otherwise empty plot in Rose Hill Cemetery outside Fort Worth, a plot that we were told was bought long ago by Oswald's mother. There have been some protests against his burial in this cemetery. No one was on hand for the funeral as mourners, except the family of the dead man, the man himself slain only 2 days after the murder of the president. The pathetic group of mourners included Oswald's mother, Marguerite, his wife, Marina, his brother, Robert, and Oswald's two children, one of them a babe in arms. Undertaker Paul Grudy told us the Secret Service had called him up and asked him to pick up the body in Dallas and give it an inexpensive funeral. He would not reveal the cost. The services were conducted by the Reverend Louis Saunders of Fort Worth. At the service, he said, "We are not here to judge." The 6 pallbearers you see here are newsmen. There were not enough relatives or friends on hand to serve as pallbearers. The public was not admitted to the ceremony, but there was not much indication that they wanted to attend. The service of Lee Harvey Oswald in Fort Worth this afternoon. Murphy Martin reporting from Dallas, returning you to Jim Burns in New York.
And in Dallas, still another service, this one for slain Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit.
We are attending the services of Patrolman J.D. Tippit here at Beckley Hills Baptist Church in Dallas. The pastor of Beckley Hills Baptist Church, C.D. Tipps Jr., conducted the services this afternoon. The church seats approximately 450 people. However, there are at least that number again on the outside of the church. Sergeants C.C. Box and C.D. Owens, and Patrolman H.M. Ashcraft, T.G. Tilson, T.A. Ross, and C.W. Harrison. As mentioned previously, interment following these services, in which this unexpectedly large gathering has assembled for the funeral. Interment will be at Laurel Land Memorial Park, and with this size crowd, it is expected to take at least 15 minutes after everyone has passed by the bier to reach Laurel Land Memorial Park. The grave site for Patrolman J.D. Tippit has been contributed by Earl Widener. He will be buried in the site in Memorial Court of Honor, which is a section reserved for those who have given lives in some special service to the community. Patrolman Tippit gave his life not only for the community, but for his nation. This Memorial Court of Honor was established about 1 year ago. Patrolman Tippit will be the first gentleman to be buried therein. Within the church, seating 450, had been filled, and now waiting outside, even beyond that, is a crowd which seems to grow when it's expected to be dispersing. People continuously make their way to the Beckley Hills Baptist Church, pay tribute to this patrolman, 39-year-old J.D. Tippit, shot in the line of duty in the 400 block of East Jefferson while attempting to apprehend the assassin of the President of these United States. He was a member of the police force for some 12 years. Born in Clarksville, he came to Dallas in the year 1946. Worked at various duties for Sears and Roebuck until 1952, when he joined the police force. At his death, he was a member of Beckley Hills Baptist Church and had been for a year, and a member of the Dallas Police Association, a great many of whose members are here paying tribute today. We think it appropriate to mention that during the services, the pastor C.D. Tipps Jr. mentioned that J.D. Tippit was an outstanding police officer and also a good family man, a man of deep character. To many people, he was an average American, a good friend. In addition to his work with the Dallas Police Force, in the evenings, he was employed at a donut shop, and on Sundays, his normal day off, he worked at a theater in order to add a little something to the budget for the family. In the words of his wife, they were always trying to put something aside, but never could. With the sudden and unexpected death of this husband and father, there was concern for the welfare of the family. However, many funds have been made available for the widow. Sheriff Bill Decker's officers have been taking a collection. And even as I speak, a Dallas suburb of Irving is conducting a fundraising campaign. Athletes of the Philadelphia Eagles football team have contributed $50 apiece to the welfare of the family, and word comes from President Pete Rozelle of the National Football League that he hopes that every athlete in the league can see fit to make this same contribution. We have mentioned that the grave site was contributed by Earl Widener. Funds have come from faraway places such as Atlanta, Georgia, Boston, Massachusetts, Indianapolis, Charleston, West Virginia, Casper, Wyoming, Wichita Falls, Texas. And also of significance, Congressman at Large Joe Poole is currently investigating the possibility of federal financial assistance. He said this was a gentleman who acted for America without personal regard for his own personal safety. Those are the words of Congressman at Large Joe Poole. J.D. Tippett was 39 years old. He is survived by his wife, Marie, and two sons, Alan Tippett and Curtis Tippett, ages 14 and 5, and a daughter, Brenda Tippett of Dallas, age 10. His father, Edgar Tippett of Clarksville, and his mother, Mrs. May Peterson, now of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Also, he is survived by four brothers, Donald Ray Tippett of Lubbock, Wayne Tippett of La Mesa, Edward Tippett of Louisiana, and Ronnie Tippett of Clarksville, and two sisters, Mrs. Christine Christopher of Dallas and Mrs. Joyce DeBoard of Garland. It's difficult at best to find something for which to be thankful amidst the tragedy that's befallen the nation and the world in the recent events here in Dallas. However, the country can view with thanksgiving swift action of one of its common folk, an average patrolman just doing his job and giving his life in the process. Bob Gooding, WFAA in Dallas.
Here at Laurel Land Memorial Park, a crowd is gathering as the funeral entourage bearing Patrolman J.D. Tippett nears. It's a beautiful day here in this very lovely cemetery, and friends and relatives of the slain patrolman and many fellow officers, including Sheriff Decker of the Dallas Police Department, are gathering. The family, of course, has been left destitute by the slaying. The vault, the coffin, the plot, all have been donated by friends and by companies in this area. Patrolman Tippett is being buried in a special section of the cemetery created to honor heroes from this area, men who have died in public service. And the patrolman who lost his life following the assassination of President Kennedy will be the first man from this area so honored. He was 39 years old, the father of 3 small children. The effect of his death was somewhat, or rather completely overshadowed by the death of President Kennedy. But now, the people of Dallas, the people of Texas, and throughout the nation are coming to the assistance of the family as they belatedly realize that the personal scope of the Tippett tragedy is as great, of course, to his family as the loss of President Kennedy was to the Kennedy family. Now we can see the entourage slowly winding far down the road. The area in back of the tent where the services are to be held is covered with flowers. plans are underway to form a memorial association in the name of the slain patrolman. Lieutenant George Butler, who is president of the Dallas Police Association, says, we're trying to interest officials in Washington also for a posthumous award or medal for his family. Lieutenant Butler goes on to say, what he did was above and beyond the call of duty. If that man had escaped, there's no telling what might have happened in Dallas. Of course, now, as we all know, the patrolman was riding in a car. He became suspicious of the presumed assassin, Lee Oswald, tried to question him, and was shot to death by Oswald. And the officers in this crowd and in the cars that now go by are all very grim, sober-faced. Of course, in Dallas, in any city in the United States, in any city in the world, the loss of a policeman is felt keenly by his fellow officers, and particularly when a man caliber of Tippit dies in the line of duty. The car carrying Mrs. Tippit still hasn't come into view. The family, of course, is without funds to erect a memorial. We understand, and now the hearse bearing the body of Officer Tippit rolls up to the burial site. This is a very inspiring outpouring of respect for this slain officer. Certainly something that's very richly deserved and very much appreciated by the family and by the fellow officers on the Dallas Police Force. And now the coffin has been removed from the hearse and being borne in into the tent by 6 patrolmen from the Dallas force, and now the family enters. The mother being supported by a relative on one side and a patrolman on the other. The small boy, little blonde-haired boy named Curtis, his sister, 10-year-old Brenda, and sitting 2 seats down from his mother's left is 13-year-old Alan. The coffin now is in place, bedecked by floral wreaths. There formed inevitably in the mind comparisons of today's services with those given to President Kennedy. And one thought is impressed as you think about it, that high or low station in life neither adds nor detracts anything from the personal grief felt by members of the family affected.
We know that all things work together for good to them who love God and are the called according to his purpose. And so we know that thou dost love us and understand us far better than we ourselves. Now may the ministry of the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, come to undergird and to strengthen and to give unto these in this hour a sense of security, that they may know that these things are true because thou dost love us. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ go with us now and continue to abide in each and every heart is our humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
That was Reverend Bowman speaking very simply, yet very movingly. The Reverend now moved down the front row of relatives, shaking their hands. The words spoken by Reverend Bowman could easily have been spoken over the bier of President Kennedy. So simple and so universal were they. We come with hearts that are dumbfounded, he said. We don't know the words to express our profoundest and deepest sorrow at the loss of this brother. Now the family and friends are filing back into the cars. The service was mercifully short. And yet, as I said, so was with reverence, a very moving experience. And Reverend Bowman's final oration, he also said something, the only possible words of comfort, I suppose, that can be spoken at a time like this. We know that these things work together for the good, for those who love God. Family sits in the car waiting for the entourage to again move out from the Laurelland Memorial Park. In a short time, when the necessary funds are collected, a simple memorial marker will be placed before the grave, and it will read, in honor of J.D. Tippit, who died in the line of duty and whose death contributed to the capture of the assassin of President Kennedy. And now the car carrying the flame patrolman's family moves slowly out of the memorial grounds. Here at Laurelland Memorial Park in South Dallas, burial services for Flame Patrolman J.D. Tippit have been completed. The widow and family have left the cemetery grounds. The ceremony was short, very moving. In its simplicity, of course, it contrasted strongly with the services in Washington for President Kennedy, but in the emotion felt here, the emotion of his fellow officers, his townsmen, his family that loved him. A great feeling of reverence was expressed. People are now earnestly beginning a campaign to get funds to help the Tippit family. They're destitute. The people of Dallas and the people throughout the United States are determined to show their appreciation for this officer who played a key role in the capture of the assassin of President Kennedy last Friday. Now, back to Bob Walker at WFAA.
Downtown at Dallas Police Headquarters, Attorney Tom Howard has just met with his client, Jack Ruby.
I'm Tom Howard, one of the attorneys for the defendant, Jack Ruby.
Does this mean you're going to apply for bail?
Yes, sir, we will.
When will you do that?
I was just explaining that the hearing will probably be held several days from now.
I see. That has not been said.
It has not been said yet.
Who will set that date, sir?
Judge Joe B. Brown, the Justice of the Peace.
And which judge will hear your appeal for bond?
Judge Joe B. Brown, Jr.
Same judge.
Will you ask that any special precautions be exercised in the handling of your defendant?
Absolutely.
And what special precautions have you asked for thus far?
Well, I say now, I don't want to be misleading about that. I will say this, that our police department is a good police department, and I'm sure that they will take all of the precautions necessary without being asked.
Are you on your way to see Mr. Ruby now?
Yes, sir, I am right now.
When was the last time you saw him?
Yesterday, about 2 o'clock. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, that's correct.
Over against this wall over here. Which side? Over on this side. Clear passageway.
What is his attitude at the last time you saw him? Does he seem very calm?
He was very upset, very nervous, almost on the verge of tears, and I would say in a state of emotional collapse.
Do you have anything to say about what will be the plea or the line of your defense at this time?
Well, I can't say this early, but I would say that if he was in the state of mind at the time of the shooting that he was when I saw him about an hour later, he was certainly in a state of emotional collapse at the time of the shooting and probably out of his mind.
Mr. Howard, have you known Jack Ruby for a number of years?
I've known him about 10 years, and he's a very likable fellow. He's well-liked in Dallas and is a very law-abiding citizen, and I'm satisfied that it wouldn't have made any difference whether the president was Republican or Democrat. He would have been upset about it in the same way.
You believe that he was out of his
mind? Do you mean that you'll plead insanity then? Is that right?
I haven't said that, and I'm not saying it now, but I will say that I think that he probably was out of his mind at the time of the
temporary
shooting.
insanity.
Probably temporarily out of his mind.
Has he expressed any remorse to you about what has happened?
I have not discussed the facts of the case with him.
Have you had any contact with a committee for Ruby's defense which is formed in California?
Several committees have contacted me, and one from California did contact me.
Where are the others, sir?
Seemed like one was from Chicago, one was from Los Angeles, and one was from San Francisco.
Have they offered to help put up bail money?
I understand that they have. I haven't.
What sort of committees are these?
Oh, just hastily formed committees.
Defense committees?
Yes.
Have you had offers for Ruby's life story?
Yes, sir, I have.
Have you accepted any?
I have not.
Sir, did you know anything about his actual political sentiments or background previous to this incident?
Only from the expressions that I've heard him make in the past, that he's always been very proud of his country, very proud of our presidents, and I don't know whether he's Democrat or Republican. He's the kind of man that believes in people serving on the jury and going to vote and such things as that.
Is there any possibility?
I know he's very proud to be an American.
Is there any possibility, Mr. Howard, that there was some connection between Oswald and Ruby, that they had met or knew each other?
There is that wild rumor going around. So far as I know and so far as I am concerned, I don't think there's a bit of truth in that.
A performer at Mr. Ruby's club said that he thought he saw Oswald there some days ago.
I think he was mistaken.
This is a memory expert. Or a person who does that kind of a performance.
In what cases have you represented Mr. Ruby in the past?
Small civil matters.
Civil matters only?
I'm quite sure that it was. I can't even remember. It's been so long.
Have you talked to this entertainer in Ruby's club?
He called me last night, but I didn't talk to him anything about what his interview was, because all the people down there seem to be giving interviews.
Is it true, Mr. Howard, that...
Sir?
You say again that you're going to speak with him now.
In a few minutes.
Will you talk to us when you come down, sir?
Yeah, sure will.
Is it true,
Have you seen the map the Dallas Morning News says was found by the police?
No, I haven't.
One more question, Mr. Howard. Is it true that Mr. Ruby may have left certain personal effects like identification and money in his car? Yesterday, the car was found in a parking lot adjacent to police headquarters.
He could have. I don't know.
Mr. Howard, you say that you have had some support evidenced in your defense of Ruby. Have you had any adverse telephone calls or anything such as that?
Had one crank call, you know, the kind you get in cases like this.
To what effect?
Oh, something about the hate group's going to get you or something like that. You expect those things in cases
Mr. Howard,
like
does
this.
he realize that what he's done perhaps create a question for the rest of history, who killed President Kennedy?
Like I have told you, all I can go by is what his sister and other people have told me about his state of mind since the president was killed. He was very emotional. He called his sister crying to tell her about the president being killed. He ordered both of his clubs closed immediately and expressed the opinion that he didn't see how people could enjoy dancing and being entertained at a time like this. Said he thought everybody should be in mourning.
Well, can you explain why during his presence here prior to the shooting, he must have been within close proximity of Oswald, but apparently then never showed any emotional outbursts or never said anything? He was here at times when it is believed that Oswald would have passed him by. He was around a group of people. Did this build up, this emotional?
I'm sure it's built up over a period of several days because he talked to many people and could hardly talk to some of them for crying.
Mr. Howard, do you think you're going to be able to get a fair, unbiased jury in a case like this?
Well, that's a difficult thing to say. Any case where there's a lot of publicity, it's hard to find a jury that is fair and unbiased, but we may be able to find one here.
Change of venue in this case, as far as you're concerned.
Not that I can see right at this time.